and welcome to another episode of Search Off the Record, a podcast coming to you from the Google Search team. My name's Lizzie, and today we have a very special guest with us, Eva, who is a UX researcher on the fill-in-the-blank team at Google. Can you tell me what you're working on?
Gladly, yes. So, hello. I'm Eva. I'm quantitative user experience researcher. Just freshly transferred to Google Shopping.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm super happy about that. And before Shopping, I worked on our internal search, and I also worked on Google Assistant at some point. So that means basically my whole Google career has spent in some shape and some mode of search. And
with UXR, this is your entire career, or did you make a career transfer?
That's my entire career in Google, but as you will learn, almost nobody who does UXR in Google actually studied to become a UXR.
Really?
We all come from very diverse backgrounds, and especially if you do something that I do, which is like a special flavor of UXR, quantitative UXR.
Yes, I heard you mention this. So it's
Yes.
not just UXR, it's quantitative.
Yes, and this is something very unique to big companies. The smaller the company, the less specialized people are, right? So if you're just starting a very small company, you could have the same person doing both research and design or doing product management and user research. But then the bigger the company grows, the more specialized the roles become. So like the first typical split is like in design and research. Then the next one, once you have a lot of researchers, right, some of them specialize in methods that focus like to get some rich user data, right? So you really want to talk to a couple of users in depth. And some other UXRs specialize in methods that get you a lot of data, but maybe not at the same depth as qualitative colleagues. In fact, everybody can do user experience research, right? You don't have to have this in your title to be allowed or able to talk to your users, right? And in
so
fact,
we can
everybody,
DIY?
of course,
Okay.
of course.
So can you tell me what is UXR? So it's researching
Yes.
UX. So does that mean you're doing something really academic? You're reading a lot. You're reading research papers. Like what is
Yes.
this thing?
So hopefully I can explain. So first, UX stands for user experience. And user experience is basically like a fancy name for person's thoughts, feelings, and action before they start interacting with any system, while they interact, and after it, right? So it doesn't mean just user interface. It doesn't mean just usability. It's just like this general fluffy thing, right, that goes around the use. And there is somehow academic branch of this, I would say, right? So you've for sure heard of human-computer interaction.
Okay,
So
yes.
it's
Is this like the degree that you would get or something?
Exactly. So this is like academic discipline that studies interaction between, humans and machines, right?
Okay.
But then UX research is kind of more like applied version of that happens in industry, because usually like when you do academic research, you want to make sure that what you learn is very generalizable and that it applies to many, if not all humans and so on. But in industry, very often, you don't necessarily care to learn things that are applicable overall, right? You just need to learn something about your product and you need to learn it fast, right? So compared to academia, I would say on average, we apply a little bit less rigor to our methods, but that's okay, right? Because at the end of the day, like we want our insights to be very practical and very applicable, right? You want to fix your product or you want to make it better, which is much different from some like academic kind of goal of understanding humanity and how humans behave in general.
And what's the goal with this whole thing? Like we're studying how people are interacting, but then what do we do with it?
Yeah. So, I mean, ideally we improve our products, right?
Okay.
So we either build better products to begin with, or we improve the products we've already built, or we learn something for the next time we are building a product. And of course, having a good product is also not a goal in itself, right? So if you own a website, let's say you own a web store, your goal is ultimately to sell products, right? To sell something to your users. But then if your website is such that people cannot find stuff in it, that they are frustrated with it, that they are not satisfied with their experience at all, they will not come back, right? Because almost there are very few products where users are really like locked into they have to use this one. They don't have an alternative.
Like you will suffer through this bad experience because you need to make the appointment at the DMV or whatever. It's fine.
Exactly. So like if you have to use a particular software for work, maybe manufacturer of that software is not necessarily like super concerned with you being super happy with this product. But in general, like for most companies, like, getting your visitors fast to their goal, getting them to come back, getting them to recommend your product further, right? These are all somehow related to how good their experience was with your product.
So if I have, let's talk practically, how would I know that I need to do UXR, a study, or to start looking into this? And let's say I have a small website. It's not a big company. I don't have a team. Is it sort of a chicken and an egg thing? Like, do I know that there's a problem and I need to bring in UXR or apply something from there? Or can I bring them in to then uncover the problem?
So how do you know that you need one? Well, it's easy because almost always you need one, right? There is no such thing.
Are you just biased though?
No, there is no such thing as a perfect product. But of course, it doesn't mean that like UXR is the first thing that your small company should do. If you are building something that has like very well established examples in the industry, right? If you are building a website or like online auction site or so on, it's already quite well known, right? Like what works and what doesn't work.
You mean like what's expected from a user who's making a bid, like let's say it's the auction site example.
Yes, and like how to present your products, how to filter through them and so on, right? So in that sense, your UXR, and you cannot hear my quotation marks here, but like your UXR might consist of you going out, looking at the examples of products that you think or somebody else thinks work well, right?
Okay.
And just kind of learning from that. And that's already some form of UXR, right?
You're probably already doing it naturally as you're paying attention to how like we're using websites and we kind of know what would be like how to find the menu. There's probably general convention that you should put a menu like this. And if you're doing something that's not standard or unusual, then that's probably a sign or it's going to be more difficult for people to find it if they don't know where the thing is.
Exactly. With the like small difference, like if you're learning from other people's experiences, you as a developer might focus on, how does this thing technically work?
Mm-hmm.
But what UXRs would probably focus a little bit more is like how users flow through products, okay, I now imagine myself as a user. I want to like buy a certain product, so which actions might I take? And then you could take an inventory of how are you guided as a user through different products, right? So this is a little bit, I guess, difference between UXR and other research. It's really like you're always trying to like understand the experience from user perspective, not like from technical perspective or even from your own, right? Because that's, I guess, a big maxim of UXR is you are not your users, right? And of course, you are maybe representing some of your users. But the moment you start building your site or your product, you just understand it too well, right? And then it's very hard to imagine yourself as somebody who is very different from you, right? We become like, as we develop our products, we really become experts in our products. And then it's very hard to like take this novice view of our products, right?
It's the curse of knowledge. Like once you know where I know exactly where this thing is on my website so I can navigate to it. And then you forget, or it's hard to unknow that piece of information. So if you're doing like a DIY approach for UXR, how do you like need to imagine that you're a different user, or do you need to go talk to people? Do you show them your website on the street? Like how can you go about doing this?
Yeah, so like all of the above. So it very much depends on like how important this is to you and how keen you are and how much time you have and how many resources you have, right? But if you Let's for a moment assume you will do DIY, right?
Okay,
so let's assume you are
Maybe
going...
I have very low budget. I'm not going to hire
low budget,
no budget,
or,
no agency. So I just want to do, it's me.
Yeah,
I'm working on, I have a documentation site, developer documentation, and I want to dabble in UXR. Do I need to have a project in mind first? Or like a problem in mind?
Yeah, I guess you should have some sort of a problem, but for sure, almost certainly you already have one. So your problem might be something like you might experience high bounce rates or low conversions. You might receive some negative feedback, right? And you might not know, oh, does this feedback reflect all my users, or did one person like have very bad cereal this morning, right? You might not even know who your users are or what they need, right? You might have a great idea for an app, but you're like, okay, but who would really use this? It might be that you observed some sort of drop in usage, right? That you cannot explain from external factors. Or it might be that you're just anyways deciding to redesign your service. So then why not like look a little bit into like how to make it easier for your users? And there are many, many resources, I mean, free online resources, right, to help yourself. But as you said, without knowing anything, it's very hard even
like
where to
searching
start.
in the dark for like UXR resources is maybe too broad of a net. But I relate to what you were saying, like finding the problems do make their way known to me. Yeah. So we do have some things on our site where we can see the helpfulness rating, for example. Like a lot of people are having a bad time on this page, or they don't like it, they hate it. They're clicking that downvote button, but I don't necessarily know why. Yeah. So would that be where UXR kind of best practices would come into play to sort of like investigate? Is it like investigative journalism?
It's pretty much like being a detective.
A detective about like, why is this happening? And then you sort of like start to investigate the metrics that, or at least the data that you have. Yeah. Potentially.
Yeah, exactly. So you of course, you would first start with the data that you have because that's cheaper than generating new data. But even if you are able to determine exactly where the thing happens, right, you might still not exactly know why. Yeah. And this is where it's actually helpful to also be able to talk to few users. So in general, there is, there are many ways you can split UXR methods, but kind of the most useful way if you are a small business is to think about, okay, there are some methods which don't require like users, and there are some methods which do require users. And it's a little bit unintuitive that you can do UXR without talking to users. But there are many methods. Like the idea is, you will ultimately do user research with users, but before you are even ready to put stuff in front of your users, because that requires time and money.
Yeah, it's like you need to show them a demo or something. Like, I guess like talking to users, are we actually talking about like verbally speaking with them, like bringing them in for an interview or like a survey, something that's a little bit more scalable?
When I say talking to users, it might just be like any shape of users giving you like their attitudes, right? So could be through a survey, could be through an email form, could be through actual conversation, could be through them making like a cool video for you while they are using your product. There are all these methods, right? But before you get there, there are also certain methods where you kind of emulate your users and how they move through your product. And these can already help you to somehow like tackle some very big and glaring problems in your interface, right? Because the thing is, you talk to users. Let's say an interview, right? You talk to them, you talk to 5 of them. You have to, there is a lot of admin related to like talking actually to users, and then you fix it, and then you have to talk to them again, right? Because
why? I guess why.
To make sure that you fixed it, right?
You introduce a new problem.
Of course, this is the ideal flow, right? It's very rare, but then like it's very expensive to talk to a user for the purpose of them telling you, hey, this button is different color than that button, right?
Yeah, like that's pointing out the obvious, exactly. Like I already know this thing.
Yeah, so there are certain methods like, I will name my favorite ones, cognitive walkthrough and heuristic evaluation, which are very structured method that would help you as a developer, product developer or designer or whatever is your role, to somehow identify these like low-hanging fruits without having to involve users, right? So
so it's like a low-cost.
Yeah, exactly. Way. So it's not necessarily enough, right? So of course, like if you can talk to users, you should. But if it's better than nothing, right? It's always better to apply more methods.
Okay, so can you tell me about the first one? You
Yes.
put in some big words that I've never heard
Yes.
before. So the first one, cognitive
walkthrough. So it has a very fancy name. It's not a very fancy method. It's in fact, sometimes my colleagues like to tease me because I really like this method, and it's a very vintage one, right? Because UXR is such a fast-moving field. And we are always getting more and more data about users. If you end up using a method from the 90s, it's already but I think it's a very cool one, right? So the whole idea of this method is that you somehow, first, you start by describing to yourself exactly who your users are and what do they know and what do they not know, right? So if you have an online store, right, you might start by thinking, okay, so they are in their 20s, they speak English and so on, right? You make a lot of assumptions about your users. This should be realistic. And then you make a list of tasks that users are accomplishing with your product, right? So if it's an online store, they might be buying something, they might be returning something, they might be comparing prices and so on, right? And for each of these tasks, you follow a very structured way how users move through the screens from the beginning to the end.
How they currently move through, or how they should?
So the ideal flow, right? So how the way that person who designed the system imagined they would move, right? And then at every point you ask yourself, okay, so this is how I think they should go. Will they do this or not, right? And then you kind of try to justify why they would go the right way or why they wouldn't. And you just repeat this a lot. It takes maybe 1-2 days to evaluate a decent-sized website, but at the end you somehow end up with a bunch of assumptions, right? They would do this because they are like this, or they wouldn't do this because product is like that. And then all you have to do is take this list of assumptions and address each one of them, right? And say, okay, this one was reasonable, I leave it. This one, okay, if I fix this bit, then they will not have this problem anymore, right? So you have kind of generated a list of problems in your product without... I mean, it's not without bias, of course, because you're ultimately making assumptions.
Maybe it's difficult if you designed it this way, then you go through this walkthrough and you're like, this is how I designed it. It's working.
Yeah, but that's not a very good, right? Because I said so is not a good argument or for why a certain experience should be like that. And if you're really honest to yourself and your product, right, you will see, okay, hey, actually, this font is quite hard to read.
Okay,
right?
so you need to be in that
so you
mindset
have to be
I'm open
honest.
to discovering the problems when I'm doing this exercise. I'm going to be critical about this thing, even though it's my website that I made.
Of course, and I mean this is the thing, right? So if you really want to, if you genuinely want your product to be better, then you will also be honest in your whichever method you're applying. Mm-hmm. But if you are trying to. And this happens a lot, right? If you're just trying to satisfy some check mark, right? If you want to say, oh, we did user research for this product, but you don't really care to improve user experience, right? Then, of course...
Well, then you're set up for failure from the beginning.
Yes, exactly. So all the advice I'm giving today is really only meant if you genuinely want your users to have better time with your product.
Yes. Okay, so the second one. So cognitive walkthrough.
Yes.
I'm using my brain. That's the cognitive part. I'm imagining, I'm putting on different hats and I'm imagining how this type of user, it sounds like user journeys almost, but in a practical way.
Yes, it is, right. It is really you are analyzing user journeys without having to adopt a super fancy framework, right?
And then the second framework,
so the heuristic
evaluation. Okay.
Yeah, all these fancy words, right? So this one is actually even simpler. You mentioned before, remember, you said, oh, there are certain standards that probably I can follow to make my website. I don't have to necessarily invent everything from scratch. Yeah. And that's actually what it is, right? You take a list of standards, you take all screens, and this list of standards can be anything that's relevant to your product, right? So if you're analyzing a website...
Let's say we have a knitting and crochet yarn website that's selling supplies and stuff like that. Is there a standard for how knitting websites should be laid out?
So there isn't a standard how knitting websites should be laid out, but there is a standard how retail websites should be laid out.
Interesting.
And even more generally, there is somehow standard how... website should be laid out, right? So, but then if your product is something else, let's say a building, which, by the way, you can totally analyze usability of buildings, right? then there will be a different set of standards, right? So your first goal is to somehow identify which principles you should apply. And these are actually like really, really high level ones, right? So they are saying stuff like contrast should be good, right? And what does it mean that contrast is good? You will still judge with your human eyes. It also says, well, you should like anticipate that people will make an error and prevent it, right? Or if they make an error, you should allow them to recover from this error easily. So it's very simple
Like don't
principles.
just like close the entire app or something like
exactly.
that. Okay.
And then all you do is like you take this list of principles, you take every single screen of your product, and then you just check that all these principles are satisfied for every screen. And that's all, right? So it's very, very simple.
Where do you find this list of standards, like this magical
So
thing?
I don't know if I'm allowed to plug something in here that I'm in no way affiliated with, but there are many, like UX communities around the world. But actually for me, like the most useful website and the place where I learned the most about these things is website from a Nielsen Norman group. So Nielsen and Norman are basically two fathers of this field of UXR, right? Or UX in general. So if you just look up Nielsen Norman group, they have hundreds, if not thousands of pages of different resources where you can learn about different methods. You can learn how to apply them. When do they apply, right? Because I did say before, well, the more methods you do, the better. It's not strictly true, right? Because at some point...
you could get overwhelmed with the amount of data or like suggestions that are out there. I mean, it sounds like it's sort of a benchmark for the industry that you're in. You're kind of looking for what is like sort of high level agreed upon. But even there, you mentioned that there might be several sources or opinions on like how to do this thing. It's not like there is only one answer, like where the menu can be, the menu button.
Absolutely. And again, there is no one way to check whether the menu button is in the right place, right? So it can depend on like what are your UXR skills that you have or don't have, right? What will resonate well with your stakeholders, right? So like I can run thousands of surveys, but if my director only wants to watch videos of users to make their mind, right, make up their mind, then my surveys are not so much useful, right? And this is what I meant about this difference between academia and industry, right? Because ultimately what you're doing as a UXR also has to be very practical, right? So, but putting all this aside, right? So like what this website also offers is, it will give you good advice. Okay, so, if you only have a low fidelity prototype, right, you can't really measure time it takes users to do something, right? So if you have a paper prototype, right, so if you don't yet have a page or a website, then you can't really measure things that have to do with also how page functions, right? So you might have latency, you might have to include for scrolling and so on, which you don't really have on a paper prototype, but things you can then check that the structure of menu makes sense, right? You can do some sort of information architecture. You can make sure that all the titles of the sub pages are understandable, that all the sub menus are where they should be.
Interesting.
That text doesn't take too long to read, with your human eyes and so on, right? So depending in what level of development you are with your product, you might use different methods, right? Or imagine you only have 100 users. You cannot run a survey with 100 users, right? Because
what do you mean, right?
You can. Oh, that's a good point. Well, right. But what I mean, let's say you email all your 100 users and let's say they really love you. So you get an awesome response rate of 20%, right?
Okay.
So that means you got 20 users to tell you, they are satisfied with your product between 3 and 5, right? I mean, you don't ask them to give you a number, you ask it with a better question, but just for the caricature. Okay, so now you have certain number, but your confidence interval is just so big that you would never really do statistics or try to model this data when it's such a small data set, right? So
so it's not a big enough data set for it to be meaningful or reliable?
I guess so. And also it might make more sense than to just email your 100 users and be like, hey, can I chat with you for 15 minutes, right? And if 20 of them tell you yes, you will talk to them for what? Somebody do the math, right? So you will talk to them for 5 hours and you will get much deeper, because even let's say all your 20 users told you they love your product, right? You scored the highest grades or the lowest grade. You still don't know why, right?
Yes. So that's why you need the qualitative research. This is the talking to them and learn more about like why was that difficult.
Exactly. And I mean, in general, I think you always like it's very good to always triangulate or like use different methods to get at the same question, right? Because every method has its own kind of uncertainty, right? Because like if you talk to 5 users, and in general, like 5 users is like a good amount. Mm-hmm. We can talk about this, like why is this good amount? Because it sounds very low, right? But then like the problem there is, okay, like you have to put a lot of thought into who your 5 users will be, like and how representative they are and so on. Mm-hmm. And you can never like from these 5 users, you know, like what are the pain points, but you don't know like how common they are, right? Because you didn't check with all your users. On the other side, you know, if you run a survey, you can check the frequency of pain points, but you won't know like the juicy details, right? They cannot show you on their screen, hey, look, here I get stuck, right? Or, hey, look, this is now off my screen because I am doing this on a small screen and you designed it for a big one, right? So it's really like every method will uncover like a different type of information for you to make your decisions, right?
Is there a recommended approach where you sort of do the qualitative 5-user thing to find out what the problems are and then do the bulk survey to like validate this thing? Yeah. Is this like a common approach?
So this is a super common approach, yeah. So this is something that I do a lot with my colleagues, right? So they will run qualitative research and they will identify certain themes and so on. And then I will go quantitatively, right? Because when they give me a list of these problems, let's say, then I can turn them into survey questions, right? And then I can really assess what's going on there. Sometimes it can also go the other way around, right? I could identify in my survey that people have a certain issue, right? Let's say they feel that the information is outdated on the website, right?
Okay.
But it could still mean many things. So then I can give this to my qualitative colleagues and I can tell them, hey, users are reporting this. Can you go and check like what exactly do they mean, right?
Okay, so you kind of find the theme, the high-level theme that like it was reported that things are out of date or difficult to use. Can you find out why?
Yeah, can you find out like
or how
more
widespread this issue is, this kind of thing?
So yeah, I guess the widespread issue is more like the quant area and why is more like a
qualitative area.
I mean, it doesn't mean you cannot also get into why with quantitative. It just needs more. Like it takes much longer, right? And it's much like you get much more noise in your data because.
So you bring us to a good point with the data. Yeah. How do you know that you have enough data and that it's good to use? Clean enough that you have. And how can you tell this if you are not like a data nerd? Is this something that the average website owner could do?
Yeah, it can, right? So, I mean, I guess like how to say you have exactly enough data. I mean, if you're doing something fancy with your data, you will usually know what you're doing, right? If you're trying to model a certain phenomenon or develop a certain metric, you will then also be able to calculate exactly how much data you need, right? And like you can calculate how certain you are in your data. But that's not something you will DIY, right? That's really something that has like its own kind of like other bucket. But if you just have some data, right, and you want to know, okay, what's going on with this data? Like, is this good? I would say any amount of data is better than any smaller amount of data, right?
Well, you always want more. Let's give a practical example. So let's say that I'm running a survey on our developer documentation site. Yeah. I'm running it for 24 hours.
Yeah.
And I've had maybe 100 responses. Is it enough?
How many users do you have to begin with?
10,000.
Okay, so that means your 100 users are about one. Are they 1%? Oh my God, I don't want to embarrass myself.
I should give you a number. No, this is even like this is a fake example. I should give you easier numbers to do some kind of computation.
No, it is 1%, right? So right now what you have done is you have taken the data from 1% of your users, right? If these 100 responses would be like equally distributed, right? So you're sure that you got all user slices in them, it's probably enough. And depending what question you're trying to answer, right? If you're trying to understand, okay, why are you on my documentation page? You can do this with 100, right? But if you're trying to like track certain metrics over time, right? So if you're having them give you their, I don't know, like their satisfaction. And if you want to turn this into a dashboard and track it over time, it's probably not enough, right? Because your confidence interval will be very big. It depends on like how much data you have. And then if you see a different number in a month measured from 100 responses, you still cannot really judge if the things have changed, because the confidence intervals will like overlap, right? So there is like too much kind of possibility for an error. So with 100 participants, you can really like learn things about like, okay, so like, are you having certain issues, right? Like, what's maybe like even something a little bit about demographics. But the problem is, as long as they're not representative, it's more just going to be very informative, but not enough to do some sort of like metrics development or something.
So this is where you come to the statistical significance number. There's like some magic number that you need to hit.
Well, there is actually a magic number, and I'm now worried I will give you very bad advice, right? But like normally when you're doing like this sample size calculations,
why are you worried?
because I don't want to give bad advice to somebody and then like have their business go up in flames because I said the number on a podcast. However, you know how we said, well, there is 5 participants are enough for qualitative research. Mm-hmm. There is actually a good reason for that, right? Of course, 5 will not uncover all issues, but the added value of insights from the 6th one is much lower than adding your 2nd or 3rd, right? So it's kind of like a curve. So from one participant, you learn a lot. From if you add a 2nd one, you learn almost double. Mm-hmm. But as you keep adding participants, like in doing interviews, you're just hearing same and same stories.
Okay, so you reach sort of like a plateau where you know enough and you like don't need to keep doing this to keep hearing the same sentiment again and again.
Yeah, exactly. What I wanted to say earlier is actually like before you start doing any fancy like sample size calculations or whatever, I would say like you can use your human eyes on your data, right? So, and this is something I love recommending to people, just like use your human eyes and look at the stuff and you will already learn so much, right? So like if you just plot your data, right? So let's say you ran a satisfaction survey on your little website for 24 hours and you got certain scores, right? And you can calculate an average. And let's say average is 3.5. Mm-hmm. But this average doesn't still tell you, okay, do I have like a lot of haters and a lot of like people who are completely obsessed with my product, or is everybody meh about it, right? The average doesn't tell you that. Okay. So if you plot your data, you will start to understand. You will see, well, what's the shape of my data? Is everybody agreeing with each other, or do I have like multiple groups that might have multiple attitudes, right?
Interesting.
Or then like if you let's say you record how long people take on a certain like sub page of your website, right? So if you just try to trace these timings, right? So if you open this website and then you sit there and you wait as much as users wait there, and then you proceed to the next action, you start understanding like, oh, wait, why is this user now sitting on this page for 5 minutes when they only need to enter one number in the field? Like, what's going on there? Mm. And then you start thinking and you realize, I'm asking them to put in their credit card number and they have to go and get their wallet, right? So I cannot assume that they will proceed like in 5 seconds when they are actually getting their wallet, right? So it really helps you just to kind of like look at it, think about it, and try to maybe like reenact what they have done if you have some sort of like information, right? Or if you see that they're bouncing between the 2 pages, then you should also go and bounce between these 2 pages as many times as they do, because then maybe you'll realize, okay, wait, actually these 2 terms are too similar and they don't know which one is the correct one, right? So they go
or they're like checking
forth.
Your shipping list of countries that ship to you and whether or not I want to make this purchase because I found out it costs the same amount to ship me this item as it is. Yeah. I don't know, something like this.
Yeah, pretty much. And another thing I wanted to call out, right? So like, as long as your data matches your research question, you don't need to have like a ton of data, right? Like if you think about it. So
you mean enough data to then fix something for users? Like if you have 5 people telling you it's a problem, it's enough to then maybe make the fix.
Definitely. So if these are your real users and if 5 of them out of 5, right, in the interviews are telling you this is an issue, this is something, right? But just because something is an issue, it doesn't mean it will end up being prioritized, right? Because there is other factors. It might be just too hard for you to fix or something. And this is, I guess, somehow like what UXRs are trying to do when conducting our research, right? We try to make sure that whether our 5 or 100 or 384 data points, wherever they're coming from, this should somehow like represent the slices of your users, right? And it should be like carefully considered who you're going to invite. But still, like if you heard 5 times something is an issue and you had no clue that this was an issue for even one person before, I mean, you learned something, right?
Yes. I mean, I learned a lot on this episode, and this has been super useful for me. And I'm like feeling invigorated to think about my survey for my site because it's something that I've been wanting to do. And I think it would be now a good time of the year to start thinking about asking people what they're having troubles with before planning for next year. But as we close out, is there like one takeaway that you wish that people would come away from this episode having either learned something or like a hot take about UXR that you want to clear up?
So I don't know if this is a hot take, but I wanted to say like whatever type of research you want to do, somebody has done it before, right? And there is probably a standard for it or a framework for it, right? And it's always better to apply something that's been like used and reused and validated than trying to like come up with your own questions, right? Because if we are not super trained like to be UXRs, we might not even know like how to avoid bias in questions or like even understanding just because you know your users are satisfied, like what does it mean? Like, why do I care? Right? So just looking it up and understanding how, satisfaction is like highly correlated with like retention rate, then you know why you're doing that, right? So just like go out, look it up, right? Look up.
Is there a resource that we can put in the description?
Again, I'm mentioning this Nielsen Norman website.
And if people wanted to find you on the internet, where could they find you?
So again, we will put a link, I guess, to my LinkedIn, because if you
link to your LinkedIn,
if you try to spell my last name from me pronouncing it, good luck with that.
Sounds good. So we'll put the link in the description. Thank you so much for joining me today. And that's it for this episode. Next up on Search Off the Record, we're going to continue talking about UX, this time about the relationship between UX and SEO. So stay tuned for that one. And bye!
Bye!
We've been having fun with these podcast episodes, and I hope you, the listener, have found them both entertaining and insightful too. Feel free to drop us a note on LinkedIn, or chat with us at one of the next virtual events we go to, or in-person events, if you have any thoughts. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can stay tuned for the next episode. Thank you, and goodbye.